Greetings, everybody, from Rosarito, Mexico. This morning, I'm going to be previewing the Deep Dive Show, the long-form podcast that we're going to be doing this Friday, recording this Friday, published on Saturday as usual. But we're going to be discussing some of the major parts of what is going on with Scott Peterson's appeals. What's the likelihood that it's going to work? How tenuous is it? What's going on? Well, let's get started. Whatever you might be going through and wherever you might be, this is Omar Serrato with the Tilted Lawyer Podcast. I'm here to take your mind off of things. Yes, I'm an attorney. No, I'm not giving you legal advice. We're going to sit and talk like people, as these are the candid thoughts of one practicing attorney, and it's after hours. So have a seat. Feel free to have a drink and join me. Let's get started. Everybody, I'm not in my usual studio setting this morning because I'm supposed to be on vacation, but I thought I'd take about 15-20 minutes and drop a preview video trying to put out daily content. I was going to try to publish this video yesterday. However, through many different variables, we were traveling for 6.5 hours by the time we got in, and the kids all rounded up. It was already late at night. We were exhausted. And so this video is getting published. Well, it's getting published today. But as far as Scott Peterson goes, there is the Innocence Project. And it needs to be distinguished between the Los Angeles Innocence Project and the one that's out in New York. Out of New York, they actually had to put out a statement because they were so embarrassed by what the Los Angeles Innocence Project is doing. And they didn't really give their thoughts about it one way or another as far as the merits as to why this appeal was being brought the way that it was being brought. But they wanted to distance themselves as much as they can. If you're unfamiliar, Scott Peterson, there was an article out of SF Gate, and they kind of broke news about previewing what the Innocence Project was going to be basing this appeal off of in their attempt to try to get Scott Peterson a new trial, ultimately, with the ultimate purpose of getting him out. And what they said was, reading from that article, when news broke that the Los Angeles Innocent Project was taking up the case of convicted murderer Scott Peterson, shockwaves went through Californians who still vividly recall the Laci Peterson case. Now his lawyer's strategy is emerging, and it's a tenuous one at best. And it really is. It depends, and I'm going to read the article, but it depends on whether or not you believe that a car that was set fire to that happened to have a rust-colored stain inside of the car contains the DNA of Laci Peterson. That's really it. That's the best that they've been able to do. Now, when this case broke, I was 22 years old. I was still an undergrad, and I was working as I remember what I was doing. It's like a production control analyst. It was supposed to be some kind of IT, but it wasn't really IT. It was like a grunt work, IT work. I was still kind of making my way. I was just a little guppy. But when this case came out, it was Christmas Eve of 2002. That day, Laci, her husband, Scott, left their Modesto home, I'm reading from the article, to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Scott came under suspicion almost immediately, with detectives noting he seemed far too calm for a man whose heavily pregnant wife had suddenly vanished right before Christmas. And if you remember, Scott Peterson, he looked like a frat boy. He was really into golf. He went off of that on that fishing boat. He had that girlfriend, Amber Fry, that he was calling in the middle of like a candlelight visual for Laci. And if I'm getting any of these details wrong, forgive me. You could attack me in the comments if you want to, but I will make sure that I correct myself by the time we get to the Deep Dive podcast. But as I recall, just candidly speaking, I feel like it was a candlelight visual that they were holding for Laci, and Scott is over there saying, "Oh, could you hear the fireworks? I'm in France," or something like that. And it was like this bizarre lie that is trying to keep up with Amber, who he got wind of it pretty quickly. And much unlike, we've been discussing Christopher Watts, unlike Nicole Kessinger, there was no doubt whatsoever that she had no involvement with Lacey. She was genuinely a mistress who was caught off guard, didn't know that she was a mistress, thought that this guy was in France or wherever he was. And so she never really garnered much hatred from the media. So in April of 2003, and I'm reading from the article, passerby found the bodies of Lacey and the fetus of her son, Connor, washed up on the shoreline near Richmond. Could you imagine that gruesome discovery? I mean, you're talking about a waterlogged corpse, and they find Lacey, and then apart from the body, I think it was a short distance there from Lacey, they find Connor, the fetus. Their remains were badly decomposed from time in the water, and no cause of death was ever determined. A few days later, police arrest Scott, who had dyed his hair blonde and filled his car with survival gear, about $15,000 in cash. That's probably worth about $28,000. $25,000 in today's cash, and other evidence of possible escape to Mexico. The detective said that he explained that his hair had turned bleached blonde, if you remember that picture, because he went swimming in a chlorinated pool, which I don't think that anybody who's ever swam in a chlorinated pool ever walked out with bleached blonde hair. But that was the story, and he ran with it. Peterson nonchalantly asked police to get him a double-double and a milkshake at In-N-Out. So Peterson's actions both before and after his wife's disappearance are hard to hand-wave away, and I'm reading from the article again. While married, he had a secret double life. They talk about his unsuspecting woman named Amber Fry, and when Fry learned her boyfriend was the husband of a missing woman, she calls Modesto police right away. They didn't need Anadarko to fill him in. Hey, this lady's been having an affair since for a couple of months now with your suspected murderer. Just the differences are really striking, because this is kind of what a woman would reasonably do if they find out that they're suspected, well, that their husband was suspected of a crime like this. So when Fry learns, calls the police, Peterson told her that his wife was dead before Lacey even went missing. Shortly before a community vigil for Lacey, Peterson called Fry and pretended to be in Paris. I was right, at a New Year's Eve celebration. So as motive, the prosecutors say that he had racked up about $23,000 in credit card debt. He was not looking forward to becoming a father. In 21, Lacey's mother, Shannon Rocha, wept as she recalled putting her hand on Lacey to feel the baby moving, saying Scott doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to feel the baby move. And on the stand, Peterson's sister-in-law said that Scott told her he was kind of hoping for infertility. And when asked if Peterson was joking, she testified, well, he wasn't laughing or joking. So a jury found him guilty on 2 counts of murder and sentenced him to death. His death sentence was later overturned, and he currently sits in Mule Creek State Prison without the possibility of ever being paroled. I wanted to fast forward to the actual reason for this appeal and why the Innocence Project took it up. Honestly don't know, because it's really not that compelling, but here it is. In an ABC News special that aired last week, several doubters of the official narrative were interviewed, and one of them is a former Modesto fire inspector named Brian Spitulski. Shortly after Lacey disappeared, Spitulski responded to the apparent arson fire of a van about a mile away from the Peterson home. He said there was a rust-colored stain found on the fabric inside of the van. And then he says, I don't know that I was tying the moment to Lacey. I was more tying the moment that it was human blood. It made it like this was much more important than just a burned vehicle that somebody was just wanting to get rid of or a cover-up. So the LA Innocence Project is seeking a court order to allow them to test for DNA on that fabric sample, and Peterson lawyers seem to be attempting to probe if Lacey and Connor were killed by 2 burglars who broke into a home across the street around Christmas Eve. So I guess what they're suggesting is that this burglary that happens across from the Peterson home, Lacey somehow tried to intervene, and she was in the attempt murdered. Her body was dropped off, I guess, in the marina, and that the vehicle that was burned was used to transport the body, I guess. So there's a lot of holes, there's a lot of gaps to fill in, but that's the apparent story that they're going to go with. I will say that if they grant that motion to test the DNA sample, which there's no harm in really doing that, and if it indeed comes out to be Lacey's DNA, or somebody that had access to that house around that time, it is pretty compelling as to why her DNA would exist there and open up a whole can of, questions that need to be answered. I will say this, though. I don't think that there's much of a chance at all that it is. And if it's not, then all of this is just nothing. And all of this speculations that's propped up from the Innocence Project is nothing more than Scott Peterson making any attempt whatsoever to try to get himself out of prison, because he's never getting out as it stands right now. So for right now, that's where we are. And on Friday, we're going to be talking about all of that. We're going to do our normal, typical deep dive. Hopefully, I'll have Eliana with me. I will be back from Mexico, and I will be there to celebrate with all of you, us just, creeping up on 10,000 subscribers. And I do believe that me and Eliana owe you guys a couple of, dares, as one of the commenters put it. I was supposed to sing a mariachi song. Eliana's supposed to dye her hair pink or purple or something like that. We'll see how we're going to facilitate that, but those things are going to go down for sure, in some way, shape, or form. We'll see. But for today's purposes, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you guys probably tomorrow. Again, from Rosarito, I return on Friday. For our normal studio show. I'll see you guys then. I love you all. Bye-bye.